Everybody, welcome to the Uptime Wind Energy Podcast. A very packed show. First off, wind farms help increase the income and GDP of local communities, particularly in the Midwest. And it's not small. It's over 5%. That's a big increase. And the Department of Energy issued a report recently that looked at the number of patents that are derived from DOE-funded efforts.
So sticking with that, we're going to go and visit our friends in the UK and see how the ORE Catapult is working with the University of Plymouth to drive some innovation on that side of the pond. And then after that, staying in the water again, going to jump down to Virginia and talk about how Dominion Energy's big project out there for $10 billion has got some funny fine print in the terms and conditions.
So stay tuned. We'll be back after the music. So, guys, a recent survey went out and study went out that looked at incomes and economies where wind turbines are installed in the United States. And obviously, in the United States, most of the wind turbines are installed in the Midwest, from Texas to Minnesota. And a lot of those locations are rural. And the feeling was on the street that putting wind turbines near or on your property has lowered the overall value of the property because of the wind turbines being there. But that turns out not to be true. In fact, as based on the survey and study, it said that U.S. counties where wind energy was built saw increases in per capita income of 5%, which is a lot per capita, and gross domestic product per capita go up by 6.5%. So when they compared adjacent counties, they saw where the wind turbines had basically better income and more economic activity. The second part of this is that the housing prices were pretty stable. Didn't seem to make much difference in terms of whether wind turbines were there or not. Didn't change home prices much. What they did see also was a shift in the workforce. So the workforce, which was primarily rural farmers, some part of them, those people started to be more mechanically inclined, and technicians. Farmers are mechanically inclined anyway, typically. But there were more people working in the wind locally, so they could work the farm and also work at a wind turbine site. That seems to be the shift. So that relates to offshore wind and the big push in the United States for offshore wind, where offshore wind is not going to be paying the local people anything, really, because they're in federal waters. They don't have to pay the landowner for anything. They're paying the federal government. So are we just going to see as much acceptance on the offshore wind side as we have on onshore wind? It seems like onshore wind, are people who are around onshore wind that are getting the monthly payments of $1,000, $2,000 a month or more are really happy with that income. That's a nice little bonus in your mailbox every month. Offshore's not going to do that. Are we going to have trouble with offshore because we don't have payments to the people along the shorelines?
Don't you think that they will get payments from where the transmission connects in? At least maybe not property owners individually, but the council should,
the
right?
Towns
if they're
will,
not, then I would
I think so.
suggest they need to rethink the agreement. Yeah. And would a lot of the benefits, is it actually from, it sounds like the property prices aren't going up so much, although I guess that, if you've got selling a farm that has a few thousand a month income, that's going to be worth something to the sale price.
Sure it is.
But it sounds like a lot of the benefit is likely due to the good jobs that came to the region. So that will still be needed with an offshore wind farm as well. I mean, they're not hiring dolphins to maintain these things or something. They'll still have, people will still live onshore to maintain them, won't they?
I think that they will. Joel, I mean, you're on the East Coast right now. You're going to see some of this.
Yeah, I'm in Newfoundland. It's windier than I'll get out every day here. They should have wind turbines all over this place. But I can say something from from a little bit of my past in the oil and gas world, and then also some knowledge from the middle part of the United States. So there's something that was put into a lot of this is oil and gas. Now I'm going to take a snapshot of, say, like the shale boom in North Dakota. When there was a lot of people that got $5 an acre for their land for lease rights from oil companies because they knew some stuff was there back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Shale boom happens in 2005, and now they're getting 10 grand an acre, right? So now you have neighbors that hate each other or that hate the companies that are there because, hey, this guy's got $5 an acre. I got $5 an acre. I paid for my kids' Christmas in 1984, but now this guy's got $8 million and he's retired to Florida. Oh, this isn't fair. That kind of thing. So that sparks a lot of some of the not in my backyard, these fights that you have in the middle part of the country. So in wind, the same thing. If you drive through Iowa, sometimes you see one farm, and you can see it by the roads and where the barns are. Like that's a agricultural institution of one company or one farmer. He has a wind farm. The next farmer doesn't. The next farmer doesn't get anything. He just has to look at the wind turbines, and that guy's getting a ton. So it does breed a little bit of contempt in those little towns, right? So going offshore, you're going to have some people that may have built some houses along the shoreline that are a little bit mad about having to stare at some wind turbines or not necessarily the winter. Sometimes it's just the blinking red lights at night, like that drive people nuts,
True.
But I guess that's just a snapshot and a little bit of a window of some thoughts around it.
Well, in oil and gas and forever, I used to work with people when we worked in Kansas that were getting oil rights or get a check in their mailbox every month for the oil rights to the property that they owned. And that's continued on for years. And some of those sites have been pumping oil for 50, 60 years. That makes complete sense to me. And I wonder if that model is not part of the answer on the offshore question. A little bit of revenue to the local towns and communities, bumping up the schools, bumping up the fire departments, making the roads better as part of the installation that they can see out their back door helps everybody to swallow it. I feel like that's where it's going to go.
I hope so.
Because right now the federal government's making out like bandits, right?
Well, and that's so
and the local participants.
Here's another example for you. In Texas, all oil activity is taxed by the local school districts. Get a lot of money. Right. So there's the school districts have their own funds, but then there's also a general fund. So you have independent school. Once their budgets are full and they reach X% of surplus, then the rest of that money goes in the general fund. So even if you're in an area in Texas where you don't have oil and gas, you benefit from the Permian Basin in your school system. And that's why they can build $100 million football stadiums for high school kids.
That's right. They're amazing, Rosemary. The football stadiums out in the Permian Basin are amazing.
Yeah. So
yeah, it's unreal.
So it's just how the contracts are signed and what the states and counties, municipalities do at the time, as well as the federal government for the revenue sharing. It's very important. I think some people could take a little bit of a look at the state of Alaska and their permanent fund dividend, right? When they found all that oil up there, they established a fund where if you're a resident, you get X amount on your taxes every year, depending on how the fund is doing that year. That money could either be flooded back into the system, like you said, Alan, for infrastructure, or who knows? There's a lot of capabilities or possibilities there.
Yeah, I do think we're starting to see a lot of resistance along the shorelines on the East Coast, and I think this is one way to sort of answer that question. And it has helped in other places. It seems like a possible answer here. And sort of moving on a little bit to another financially impacted area is the area of research and what the Department of Energy has been working on in the United States for 40 plus years. There was a report put out last year in 2021 that talks about DOE funded wind energy patents and how many of the DOE funded projects have resulted in a patent. From 1976 to 2018. There was 236 patents. So that's a little over 40 years, and 236 patents isn't a lot. It actually represents about less than 1% of the total number of wind energy patents filed in that same time period. Where if you look at what the industry has done in that same time period, GE, and just in wind patents, forget about all the other GE patents, and just in wind patents, GE was awarded almost 2,200 patents. Vestas was awarded about 1,700. Siemens also about 1,700. So they, 10 times what the DOE was able to generate in terms of patents. Now, the DOE is making an argument that, the GE patents are based on our patents, so they're building on the work that we did. That's That's probably true on some level. But if you think about the amount of money that the DOE has spent, is that money being spent in areas that is generating new technology, new advancements? It doesn't look like it. And if the recent signing of the Inflation Reduction Act is trying to promote U.S. manufacturing of wind turbines and wind energy and solar, same thing, do we have even a framework to create new technology and new manufacturing techniques in the United States? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I've been using the DOE stuff, NREL, Sandia, if that's how you say it. A lot of government funded research in wind energy. That was pretty much all that I had when I was doing my PhD research. I attempted to get some, industry collaboration to get some of their real data and was unsuccessful. So it's not real data in the sense that it's not, real wind turbines that have been operating commercially for the most part, but there is data made by people with real expertise in the industry. And, you can get a wind turbine design to use as a baseline for your new design, or you can get, some good operational data or, even wind speed data. They've got a bunch of design tools so that you can, focus on you don't need to design from scratch an entire wind turbine blade geometry and structure and, materials distribution. You can just focus on the one part that you want to work on. So I definitely have a time I'm like, well, this is amazing that this is all provided for free, totally open to anyone in any country. I mean, I was researching in Australia, obviously. So they're doing something very valuable, and are they limiting the benefit of that to Americans? I didn't see that they were, and I was so pleased as an Australian. We don't have a lot of wind turbine research here, so I would have been quite stuck without it. Or I would have still done my project, but it would have had minimal relationship to the real world, So I can see a point. Is that good use of U.S. taxpayers' dollars to produce all that for the benefit of the world? I mean, certainly, I think it's nice. Thank you for doing it, but I didn't pay for it.
Yeah, and if you look at some work that the EU has done in recent times, they'll publish the areas of research that they're involved in, and one of them is wind, obviously. And if you try to go find the research, you can't get access to it. Where anything that the U.S. government essentially puts out, you can get your fingers on somehow. You can either get it from a local library or you can get it because it's posted online. It makes it really easy. And so there's just a huge difference in the way that Europe and other countries deal with creating new technology and the way the United States does it. But you kind of get the feeling like, well, that the U.S. is funding other countries to develop wind. That's what it feels like. And I think the data somewhat supports that. And I'm not sure that's a great concept because we're in a slightly different world and we haven't really adapted to it. And I'll give you the counterpoint to this. OR eCatapult, which is a UK funded organization, is working with the University of Plymouth. Oh, okay. You see these OR eCatapult press releases on a fairly regular basis. And they have a new offshore development. It's called the Collaborative Offshore Renewable Energy Subsea Systems COSS Research Accelerator. So what the OR eCatapult is doing is working with the University of Plymouth, who has all these great labs, offshore tanks, sea tanks, and all the infrastructure to do testing. OR eCatapult, the university are working together without government funding to connect them with industry groups to help fund research that is directly then applicable to the industry. So unlike the United States, it isn't a company or industry partner there. It seems like in the GE case, GE, the Department of Energy, GE sort of piggybacks on some DOE stuff, and then it gets publicized to the world. The way that the UK is doing is a different model. They're saying, hey, we don't need federal funding or government funding for it so much as we just need to connect the dots here. because there's plenty of money being poured into renewables. We just need to help our local economy and businesses grow. And here's how we can do it. We can actually connect them with a bunch of grad students that are really smart and universities that have research facilities and get things done less expensively than we could do it ourselves internally. And doesn't it seem like just a totally different model than what the United States has built?
In the US, you have a bit of both models, right? Because you don't have so you have, and of course, there's a difference as well between state-funded institutions and private institutions, and there's a big money change there. So you have some of both, but I think the ones that that come to the top of your head, a lot of that research is kind of like this. Like I've seen a lot of programs coming out of so I've spent a lot of time in Houston. The Rice University, big innovation and technological fund there. That's all funded by oil and gas companies and industry. It's more like the ORE catapult version here, instead of relying on government funds. I think that the U.S. has a special case in a lot of the government funded laboratories that we have. Like we talk about Sandia, Los Alamos, NREL. There's a lot of those programs out there.
Yes.
And that's all ARPA-E. We just talked about ARPA-E. There's a lot of those funds out there, and I think there's a danger of, if you're working on something that you're trying to keep close to your chest, that it gets out when you work with those guys. But I think there's a lot of opportunities.
Oh yeah, I agree. But who are the universities that are working in offshore wind at the moment?
None. That
I can't name them. I know the ones that we saw, that Rosemary and I saw down in San Antonio.
Yeah, so I continuously talk about this as well, because of course the company I work for, Wind Power Lab, is a Danish company, and we work with DTU all the time.
Right.
So there's a lot of industry involvement on that side of the pond. And over here, I know like Georgia Tech has one of the mechanical engineering labs is doing some stuff with for repurposing blades, making a circular economy out of blades, which is a great idea. Or the industry's tackling it, a great problem to tackle. But that's really the only one I know. There's not a whole lot of.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's in that government funded laboratories rather than in the universities. There isn't even really a university program that I know of that is a wind energy program in the U.S. at a high level.
There must be.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are, but it isn't like it slips to the tip of your tongue all the time. And I think that there's just so many different models that have been happening for the last 50-ish years. I'm not sure the U.S. has the best model, and I'm not sure we're looking for the best model at the moment. And if we're going to be putting $300-400 billion into something, we ought to be looking to see if we can change the system to be more efficient at it. That's what I see. I just don't see the growth that we probably should have in terms of engineering, growing engineers, growing technology, becoming that root base of technology growth that the United States has been in university systems for all kinds of other things. In wind and solar, really nothing. And you can actually see it in the patent numbers, the same thing. The patent numbers have dropped off considerably in the United States in wind industry in the last 10 years. It's just fallen off a cliff. I think Rosemary's point is, well, the industry's developed. And I think, well, that's probably true, but it really hasn't developed in offshore very much at all. Onshore, I agree with you. We're just pumping out wind turbines, but offshore, there's so much to know, and we haven't necessarily been proactive. We're gonna go to DTU.
Yeah.
we're going to pickpocket them, right? Or we're going to go to ORE Catapult and we're going to pickpocket them because the United States hasn't been proactive in that area. It just seems like a very odd time.
You can see it culturally, though, in the U.S. I mean, as far as so take a step back, and Alan, you and I maybe put our American flag patches in our back pocket for a second, and we just talk for a second about, we aren't the first people to develop renewable and clean tech. You know what I mean? Like, so we're a lot of oil and gas, coal, like that's been our thing. That has driven the American economy for so long, the Industrial Revolution, all this, pumping out vehicles. We're, the Ford Model Ts and stuff like that. The history of innovation in the U.S. is also on the inverse of it. It's glutton, kind of, right? In certain form. So we're not sitting looking at the clean energy space, renewable space, and you can take that and look at like who manufactures solar panels. Where are all the OEMs for wind? None of them
China.
exist here, right?
China.
China, yeah.
Right.
But I mean, the big OEMs for all wind stuff they exist in Europe, where they thought a little bit before we did about climate change and wanted to do renewable energies and things of that sort. So culturally, on the
Sure.
clean energy spectrum of tech, we're just kind of like we're starting to hit our stride, and we're a lot of innovators and innovation hubs and money being flown in from government, from private industry, from all these different things. But we're that's not what we're first in, I guess, or not our focus.
No, but I look at it. Can I use an analogy? Rosemary, are you going to punish me for using an analogy? Because you should punish me for using an analogy. It's that I look at making silicon chips, right? That was really started in the United States for the most part. And then right now there's nobody making those things. And then they had a recent bill in Congress to try to bring that back. So it was sort of nurtured because we have a huge marketplace for it, that we can afford to do it. And then all that industry just poof goes offshore, and we don't think anything of it. I think wind has done that. Solar has already done that. Solar's totally done that, more than even wind. It's exploded offshore, and we sit here writing software in the United States. That's what we make. Facebook. We don't make wind turbines.
Yeah. And
I think that's where we're going to have trouble. And Rosemary sees it the opposite way. In Australia, Australians are digging in the ground. They're doing the hard stuff, right? We don't do that in the United States. So you realize, like, at what point does the United States figure out, like, we got to build stuff, and we need to focus on building the things and building the industries, and are we going to do it? And do we have a structure to support it? I don't know. Could be wrong. We may have a great system. It just doesn't seem like it, because when I buy a Siemens Gamesa wind turbine, it ain't coming from the U.S.,
Get the latest on wind industry news, business, and technology sent straight to you every week. Sign up for the Uptime Tech newsletter at weatherguardwind.com/news.
So big news with Dominion Energy down in Virginia. As everybody knows, they have a couple of wind turbines. I think there's 5 or 6 wind turbines. No, there's 2 wind turbines out in the water off the coast of Virginia, but they're going to be putting a whole bunch more because of Dominion Energy's plans to put 2.6 gigawatts, about $10 billion, in 176 wind turbines off the coast of Virginia Beach, a very lovely area. So they were granted approval to go do this work, which is one of those major milestones into moving the project forward. Dominion plans to complete construction in 2026. So they got a short time frame here. When they're discussing this with the state and coming up with the final ingredients to an agreement, there were several concerns raised throughout the proceeding regarding the affordability of the project and the financial risks to taxpayers, or ratepayers, I guess, are the same people. That the state of Virginia was concerned that if Dominion Energy's project went south, that they had more costs than they expected. They didn't want the ratepayers of Virginia to pay for that. So that's where they got into a sort of a more longer term talks. So here's what ended up happening. The state sort of forced on consumer protections. And it included a requirement that Dominion notify the state within 30 calendar days if it finds that the total project costs are expected to exceed the current estimate. Now, Joel, does every project not go over budget? And offshore in the ocean?
I can
Come
guarantee
on,
you
right?
this one's going on.
You might as well start filing that paperwork
You have
now.
weather delays. You got a whole bunch of able seamen out there that have never installed a wind turbine. Jones Act people that have never been on a vessel. It's not gonna go well.
Right. So there's going to be delays, and then it says if they have to notify the state if the final turbine installation is expected to be delayed beyond February 4th, 2027. Now, I don't know what's magical about February 4th. I thot that's
Super Bowl?
a very odd date, but okay, February 4th, 2027. It must be Super Bowl
Sunday.
There's a lot of big screen TVs you got to power up for that big weekend, right? I mean, that must be what it is. So, Rosemary, it also said that one of the conditions was is that beginning with commercial operations and extending for the life of the project, customers shall be held harmless for any shortfall in energy production below an annual net capacity factor of 42%, as measured on a 3-year rolling average. Now, that sounds tight to me because I looked up the net capacity factors of other wind farms, and it's about 40 to 41. So 42 seems onshore.
Okay.
Onshore.
But this is an offshore wind farm.
I know that's offshore. Yes, I agree with you. But 42% seems like a lot to me. But also with the fact that in the UK, they've been seeing slowing wind speeds, and that the amount of power produced on the offshore projects has dropped by like 10%, something magical like that, a huge amount engineering-wise. 10% is a lot. That would make this project start creating red flags. Like Dominion's going to start paying for the lack of production. Doesn't 42% seem higher for offshore?
Oh, I mean, 42% isn't high for offshore for a new project. I mean, for it to stack up economically, you need a higher capacity factor on offshore than the same project onshore, because the cost of installing an offshore wind farm is way higher than an onshore one. So the figure doesn't jump out at me. And I know that there's plenty of offshore wind farms that are pushing up past 50% capacity factor expected. I don't know what their expectation is here, but it is interesting that if you had 3 years in a row of low wind speeds, that the company would be liable for that. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's funny. It's a topic I've been talking about a little bit recently in social media comments. I'm not sure why capacity factor, people are so obsessed by capacity factor, because you can make it whatever you want. So, if I was this company and the capacity factor just had to be met, you put in some small generators with big long blades and you'll bump up your capacity factor. You'll get less annual energy production because of it, but your capacity factor will be good. You can, to a certain extent, choose whatever capacity factor you want. You could get close to 100% if you had a small enough generator. It would just be a stupid project because it wouldn't make much, it wouldn't generate much electricity.
Well, that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to hear, Rosemary.
Yeah, it's a weird metric.
Rosemary, that's what I wanted to hear, because I figured you knew what the angles were there. Because as an industry expert, you've been around it a long time. Are there ways to get around this that to protect Dominion's investment? Are there ways that they can help themselves? Like, would that be something that they do? Are there ways to game the system?
Put in a low wind speed turbine in a high wind speed area, and you'll get less energy production, but you'll pay more for the turbines because you've got longer blades. But your generator is going to be, like really cranking out close to maximum the whole time. So you get a great capacity factor. But I've never seen a performance guarantee written in this way, and I'm not an expert, but I did work quite a bit with performance guarantees when I was working on de-icing, the blade heating systems. For LM wind power, because that's something that people are pretty concerned about in that area. And it was always a calculation based on actual wind speeds. You were never requiring the OEM to guarantee that the wind would be, a certain level. So, you'd give a power curve, and then you'd say, we guarantee uptime of 98% or whatever it was. And then you do the calculation for what it was. It wouldn't be the capacity factor, because it's not just your uptime and meeting the power curve that you promised. You also need good wind to get a good capacity factor, or average wind to get the average capacity factor. So it's a strange way to write it. And I would not recommend someone signing something like this unless they had a huge buffer and some way to hedge.
Well, the question. I've got the hedge in my hand right here. But the question I have is, Dominion, what is their track record in developing wind onshore, offshore? Do they have any? So maybe they stepped in some mud here that they didn't know they were stepping in, because that's one of the articles I read about this. So I came across this one, and I called a couple of my friends within the wind or the renewable energy insurance side of things, and specifically two guys that deal in downtime insurance. And when I told them about this contract, they said, "Thank you so much. Call you back in a bit." Because they were going right to their teams going, "Call Dominion. We want this risk." because the
Sure.
the hedge is
Yeah.
buy reinsurance on it if you're Dominion. You have to.
You have to.
So
right.
But it's
I
weather
think so, too.
insurance, really,
Yeah,
right?
but that's what all insurance
It's-
and wind
it's
is.
insurance
It could
against
be.
persistent low wind speed.
So it's
Rosemary, what are the single point failures in an offshore wind system? The ones that can really bite you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the wind not being there is the one that's front of mind for this particular one, and then some sort of serial design defect that took down a fleet
Yes.
rather than just one turbine. And I guess
Cable?
you can also have some offtake problems as well. Yeah, something like that.
Transformers, substation go bad. Substation
Yeah.
get hit by a boat, tip over, hit the water, boom, you're down for 6 months.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a lot of single point failures in this that is hard to address. And if I was insuring it, I would really want to make sure that I had my bases covered, because on onshore, it's not as sort of single point failure mode coupled to the way that offshore wind will be. Am I missing something here?
Well, there's still got one connection point to the grid. And you
True,
do
but it's
see,
not
I mean,
run
there's
through the
been
water.
examples in Australia where, some operating system, or there was like a safety trip that tripped during an event that it should have been able to ride through. It was huge fine and terrible for the industry as a whole, because the whole of renewable energy in Australia got blamed for this one blackout that was caused by a bunch of other failures. But the wind farm shouldn't have failed. It should have been able to keep on operating and supplying, but it tripped because of some fault condition. So I think that you do see them from time to time in onshore as well. But yeah, the capacity factor guarantee is a weird one because it depends on the weather.
We were just in a meeting today with a insurance group out of Switzerland talking about natural catastrophe monitoring. So if you go in natural catastrophe monitoring, that was the opposite of what we're talking about here for downtime. But their worry was, we have all this risk out there. Do the models for insurance companies cover this, or are they out to lunch? Because there's not a good model there. A hurricane comes sweep. There's been nothing to insure off the coast of Virginia ever, right? So there's not a model that's built for the insurance industry to say, this is every 10,000 years we have 2 hurricanes that would wipe out all these. That doesn't exist. So I foresee at some point in time, whenever we get wind offshore in the U.S., whether it's in the Gulf or up the East Coast, there's going to be a hurricane that takes out half of a wind farm. I believe it will happen.
It has to happen. It happens in Texas with
within
tornadoes
the next
all the
10
time.
to 20 years, it's going to happen. So now if you have insurance company that's insuring the physical asset, and then you have insurance company that's insuring the downtime, who's at fault? I would foresee that the name Dominion will be in court cases until this thing is decommissioned.
Yeah. It's a shame. It's a shame, because I think that putting that one provision in is really going to handcuff Dominion, and I'm not sure that's what you want to do. They're trying to protect the ratepayers, and I get it, but I'm not sure that's the right way to go about it. We're going to find out. Maybe it is. Maybe it was great. Maybe it's great for the Commonwealth of Virginia. But on Dominion's side, Dominion can walk away from a project. It's one of the things they can do still, is walk away. And that would be the worst thing to have happen. So more to come. We'll just have to keep our eyes on it and watch how it develops, because there's a lot more to happen in the next couple of years as Dominion makes this project real. That's going to do it for this week's Uptime Wind Energy podcast. Thanks for listening. Please take a moment and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. Be sure to subscribe in the show notes below to Uptime Tech News, our weekly newsletter, as well as Rosemary's YouTube channel, Engineering with Rosie. We'll see you next week on the Uptime Wind Energy podcast.